Greetings everyone. Welcome to today's lecture on linguistic reorganization. If we look at the political map of India, then we see so many states and union territories. But what is the history behind them? Modern states are large and complex with several cultural and economic problems and historical experiences which have added complexity to their genesis. In today's lecture, we shall be discussing that. Since independence, Indian state has to deal with the demands of separate statehood, largely based on language, culture, ethnicity, religion, etc. Later, the basis for separate statehood demands were largely shifted to better governance and greater participation, administrative convenience, economic viability in the development needs of sub-regions. The very beginning of 21st century in India also witnessed the creation of new states like Chhattisgarh, Uttarakhand, Jharkhand and Telangana. As democracy takes firm roots, such aspirations also grow. The so far neglected sections of the populations realize their own importance, they demand new provinces or states, and they want new borders and a secure autonomy. But if we talk about the background as to how and when this process started, then India's territorial restructuring took place in several phases over several decades. India's defining constitutional movement was 1946 to 1949, when the main elements of India's constitutional structure were determined, but usually the territorial structure of the state was not settled beyond the general idea of a quasi-federal structure. The drafting of the constitution was assigned to the Constituent Assembly. Following the major Holocaust between the two communities and the Great Calcutta killing of 1946 and the partition that happened in 1947, there were several developments that followed. The territorial issues were most perplexing during the constitutional drafting, not simply because India was vast and complex, but more importantly because the territorial issues had factored into the mainstream anti-British nationalist politics led by the Indian National Congress since the beginning of the 20th century. It came to be recognized that state reorganization along linguistic lines was probably inevitable, but given the recent traumas as well as the concern of the Congress party to focus on building the union first, the issue was put off for a few years immediately after independence. Language has long been politically salient in India, which today has 22 officially recognized languages, most territorially rooted with millions of speakers and as many as 1,549 distinct mother tongues. About 10% of the population belongs to territorially concentrated Aboriginal peoples speaking various dialects. The creation of many subnational units through states reorganization has meant more democratic legitimacy to the whole federal system by bringing the government closer to the people in a large and very populous country like India. After the emergence of Mahatma Gandhi in Indian politics, and especially we see a trend that emerged in early 1920s, the Congress party had created its provincial committees in accordance with ethno-regional considerations that brought the party closer to the people and linguistically more intelligible also for them. and the trend had started much earlier, but especially with the rise of Mahatma Gandhi and anti-British nationalist movements, territorially based ethno-linguistic identities came to be utilized by Congress for building mass bases in different parts of the country. And from the beginning of the 20th century, and especially one can even say that after 1885 onwards, when Indian National Congress was formed, Congress organizational setup came to reflect ethno-linguistic territorial cleavages, and it was these cleavages that ultimately were going to result in these different states and the demands that were associated with the state formation process. So we see that by 1918, the Congress had formed around 21 provincial Congress committees. These were more or less vernacular units, and they were also territorially concentrated in different parts of the country. It was to be seen that in 1920, at its Nagpur session, Congress committed itself to reorganizing India after independence into a federation based on linguistically based units. And this commitment was further reiterated in 1928 through the Motilal Nehru report. Congress, as the main party of the anti-colonial liberation struggle that was going on, in the beginning sought more Indianization of the administration and justice, and also the discrimination led to self-determination movements of territorially rooted ethnic minority groups. Several historical studies have also indicated that from its very beginning, Congress was an inter-regional coalition seeking to carve out a composite national entity. So, Congress national ideology was at variance with its continuing cultivation of ethnic aspirations, including by its regional units that were working to build mass bases. So, nationally, Congress' so-called composite nationalism approach coexisted with the rise of ethno-regional nationalities in different parts of the country. For example, Assam, Tripura, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, which Congress promised to accommodate within the future federation of independent India. So we see that at the time of independence, the country had inherited several cleavages, and these cleavages had been inherited from the imperial British. In imperial India, the major cleavage was of course the religious conflict between Hindus and Muslims, which ultimately led to partition on 14th August 1947. Then the other political cleavage that emerged at independence was between the 560 princely states versus the directly ruled provinces. Then one can also point out the ethno-linguistic cleavages that were mainly linguistic in character, but they also included tribal affiliations, especially in northeast of India. The princely states were of different sizes and socio-cultural complexion and were interspersed between India's provinces. During the colonial period, they had enjoyed varying degrees of independence under indirect rule of the British. Then one can also point out ethno-territorial cleavages that were particularly acute in Madras and Bombay presidencies, as well as in parts of central and northern India. So if we go by the survey, by 1931, there were around 17.7 million Telugus, 4 million Oriyas, 1.7 million Kannada speakers, and 3.7 million Malayalam in Madras presidency, and the minority language speakers were territorially concentrated. While in Bombay presidency, there were 3.4 million Gujarati, 3.1 million Sindhi, and 2.6 million Kannada speaking people. So we see that the picture was quite complex. In northern and central India, the cleavages in Madras and Bombay presidencies were particularly calling for urgent attention, and this was a very hard task for state reorganization process. The ethno-territorial issue kept members of the Constituent Assembly quite busy and preoccupied, especially during 17th and 18th November 1948. And the Assembly kept on searching for institutional solutions in building the Union. The issue came up very frequently in a number of debates of Constituent Assembly for almost 3 years, but the problem could not be resolved. The members with very strong ethnic roots, especially from areas like Madras and the Punjab, were quite vocal in highlighting the self-determination rights of those communities. So at that time, the issue of territorial reorganization of India meant largely the formation of linguistic provinces or sub-national units, to which Congress had committed itself as early as 1920. So Pattabhi Sitaramaiah, a leading member of the Constituent Assembly and the Congress Party president in 1948, insisted upon solving the problem of formation of linguistic provinces as the first and foremost problem, and a problem that could no longer be brushed under the carpet. So there was now a chorus of calls for a new language-based political map of India almost immediately after independence. In each of the linguistically distinct regions, different constellations of forces mobilized around the issue. But the local units of Congress always favored creating a linguistic state. The leaders within the Congress, more specifically leaders of the provincial committees, were the main actors who were fighting for linguistic rights. But there were also regionally based parties and groups, including associations that had been formed specifically to demand a linguistic state. And one of the strongest movements was on the part of the Telugus, whose demand for a linguistic state dated from 1916 itself. The fast unto death on 15th December 1952 of Sri Potti Ramalu, a committed Gandhian who demanded a Telugu-speaking state of Andhra Pradesh, triggered large-scale violence in the region. The state of Andhra was then carved out of Madras on 1st October 1953, thus forcing the larger issue of state reorganization to the forefront. Parliament passed the States Reorganization Act 1956, doing away with the 3 categories of states in the 1950 Constitution and putting all states on an equal footing in terms of powers and authority, except Jammu and Kashmir, whose accession to India took place under very special circumstances. The government accepted most of the State Reorganization Committee's recommendations, but made some modifications in the States Reorganization Act. Andhra Pradesh was enlarged with the addition of the Telugu-speaking people from the Telangana region of Hyderabad. Then Mysore, which was a former princely state, had already been integrated to India, was enlarged further by absorbing the Kannada-speaking areas of Hyderabad, Bombay and Madras. Then thirdly, Bombay was made a bilingual state. having both Marathi and Gujarati, by adding of Maratha speaking areas of central provinces Berar, Hyderabad, and the Gujarati speaking areas of Saurashtra and Kutch. Then in the central provinces were renamed Madhya Pradesh, though diminished in the south by the loss of areas of Berar, but enlarged by the merger of three other Hindi speaking areas of Madhya Bharat, Vindhya Pradesh and Bhopal. Punjab was enlarged by the merger of the Punjab and East Patiala states union to form the second bilingual state, where the Hindi speakers were dominant in the south while the Punjabi speakers continued to remain dominant in the North Punjab. Then Kerala was created by enlarging Travancore Cochin by absorbing a portion of the Malabar coast of Madras to form the Malayali speaking state. In this case, the SRC recommendations were more or less followed. Thus, as a result of the implementation of the States Reorganization Act, 14 new or revised states with equal powers and status emerged, largely respecting the SRC proposals. The other minor changes in respect of Bihar and West Bengal were adhered to. However, Tripura was not merged in Assam. Then we also see that the SRC's proposals and the new state creation did not satisfy all the stakeholders. There were a large number of dissatisfied elements. For example, the creation of a bilingual Marathi and Gujarati state of Bombay was strongly opposed by groups among both the Marathi as well as the Gujarati people, as they wanted separate distinct homeland for themselves. Then the leadership of the opposition was provided by Samjuk Maharashtra Samiti, a united front with the communists and other left parties such as the Praja Socialist Party in Maharashtra and the Maha Gujarat Janata Parishad in Gujarat. Anti-Congress opposition parties emerged in Gujarat, which were supported by different sections of society like workers, farmers, students, businessmen, artisans, and very powerful protests were organized, which resulted into more than 80 deaths and also riots at a number of places in Bombay. The entire situation went to such an impasse that a very respected Congress leader, C.D. Deshmukh, then the finance minister in the central cabinet, resigned in protest. On the other hand, a large section of congressmen also joined the movement for a united Maharashtra. Thus, we see that the first major phase of state reorganization in India was not entirely a peaceful process, and important ethno-linguistic cleavages and issues remained unresolved. The question of the most linguistic minorities could not be avoided, but only minimized to some extent. States reorganization ensured that the combined percentage of all linguistic minorities in a state should not be more than half of the population, but there were several cases where linguistic minorities totaled more than 40% of the population in descending order, and this was the case in Jammu and Kashmir, Rajasthan, Punjab and Assam. Mysore had a diversity of languages, but the total minority did not exceed about 1/3. In the rest of the cases, the figure continued to remain around 22%. These remaining numerous minorities were thus significant, but reorganization had considerably reduced the combined linguistic minorities nationally from more than 50% of the total population before 1956. In the 1960s, there was a round of reorganization along mostly linguistic lines in respect of bilingual Bombay and Punjab. After the major disturbances and movements in Bombay, the Bombay Reorganization Act of 1960 gave birth to two linguistically more homogeneous states of Maharashtra with the majority Marathi speaking people and Gujarat with the overwhelmingly Gujarati speaking people. So, bilingual Bombay had linguistic minorities that constituted as many as 49%, mainly Gujarati, along with tribal people as well as a large number of migrants. The Gujaratis demanded and got their state of Gujarat also in 1960. Now, if we talk about the process of integration of Indian Union after independence, then Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, as the Minister for Home and States Affairs, had the responsibility of bringing about a change in the political map of India and welding the British Indian provinces and the princely states into a united India. So, British India consisted of 17 provinces and 562 princely states. The provinces joined either India or Pakistan. The princes of the princely states, however, won the right of either remaining independent or joining either of the two nations. Under the leadership of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the new government of India employed political negotiations backed with the option and on several occasions the use of military action to ensure the primacy of the central government and of the constitution that was then being drafted. There were three states, Junagadh, Hyderabad and Kashmir, which proved more difficult to integrate than others. So, if we talk about the case of Junagadh, there was a plebiscite in December 1947, which resulted in a 99% of vote share, which had decided to merge with India, annulling the controversial accession to Pakistan, which was made despite the people of the state being overwhelmingly in favor of joining India. Then, if we talk about the case of Hyderabad, then Patel ordered the Indian army to depose the government of the Nizam and especially after the failure of negotiations, which was done between 13th to 17th September 1948, and the very next year it was incorporated as a state of India. Now, if we talk about the way forward as to how the issue of these kind of demands should be tackled, then one can say that economic and social viability rather than political considerations must be given primacy. Parent states that lose out in terms of physical and human capital may be adequately compensated. There should be certain clear-cut parameter and safeguard to check the unfettered demands. Also, it is better to allow democratic concerns like development, decentralization, good governance rather than divisive forces like religion, caste, language or dialect to be the valid base for conceding to the demand of creation of a new state. Apart from this, the fundamental problems of development and governance inadequacy, for example, concentration of power, corruption, administrative inefficiency, deficits of various kinds, etc., must be addressed from time to time. So, the solution is not further division of country into smaller units, but rather a more judicious review of the entire process. Thank you.